any cheese at all?
No. A senseless waste of human life.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cheeseman Podcast. I'm your host today, Brendan from Brazil Spurs, and joining me today for this very special show, we're honoured to be joined by Kick It Out Head of Development and huge Spurs fan, Troy Townsend. Troy, welcome to the Cheeseman. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, to be honest, Brendan. Thanks for inviting me on, first of all. I know it's taken a long while for us to get here, but we're here. But yeah, not too bad. Obviously, funny circumstances that we're all living in, trying to make the best of all kind of situations we can, managing to continue to work, which is great. But yeah, just really appreciative of those around me at the moment and the things that I do, to be totally honest.
Yeah, I also noticed it was your birthday on Saturday, was it?
It was indeed, yeah. 40 again, Brendan.
Happy belated birthday for the week. I hope you enjoyed your birthday weekend.
Yeah, it was a beautiful day. Chasing after the grandkids, but it was a really beautiful day. I probably ate too much and drunk a little bit too much, but hey, no one's watching, so that's fine.
Awesome. Oh, and whilst we're at it, do pass on our thanks to Andros for not cutting inside and reaching the top corner from 30 yards the other week. That would have ruined the documentary, or not, depending on what side.
I think it would have been a great addition to the documentary, to be totally honest. But yeah, no, it didn't happen, unfortunately. But yeah, a well played out draw. Yeah. A draw which was good for Palace, to be totally honest, and obviously did what it had to do for Spurs as well. So yeah,
got us there. I think draw was happy all round. I think. Joining Troy and myself, we're delighted to be joined once again by South American football expert, friend of the pod, Tim Vickery. Tim, welcome back. Thanks again for joining us so soon. How's that mozzarella?
I'm off it at the moment. I've got a bit of a dicky stomach, so I'm keeping it light at the moment, keeping it easy. Hoping I haven't had a pizza since the whole thing started.
Really?
Her indoors. She's not really into them, so I'm hoping my stomach's going to get better soon, and I'm going to be ordering a pizza, extra mozzarella.
Brilliant. Troy, do help yourself to the cheeses on offer here. We are the cheese room after
all. No worries at all.
Tim, first of all, I saw sadly that one of your Sport TV colleagues, Rodrigo Rodriguez, passed away last week at the age of 45. Due to COVID-19, so our sincere condolences. How are things in Rio? How are you getting on at the moment?
Well, personally, I'm great because I've got a lovely flat, terrific views, and I can work from home. So it's an inconvenience for me, but it's not a disaster. For many, it is a disaster, especially in the poorer communities, especially in the Afro-Brazilian communities. Mm-hmm. Because they're living in much more cramped surroundings, much less pleasant surroundings, and many of them are having to go out and subject themselves to the kind of risks that my mate Rodrigo suffered and killed him at the age of 45, which really should bring it home. Yeah. Really should bring it home to people that this is not just a flu or a fever. He had the symptoms for 15 days. He thought he was, just get over it and get back to work, and then it attacked his brain. And sometimes here and killed him quite quickly. Sometimes here in Rio, I just think I'm living in a different planet. And there's a couple here just down the road from me, a retired couple who to make themselves safe, they learnt on the internet how to build an astronaut suit. And that's what they do. They walk up and down Copacabana Beach in an astronaut suit, to keep themselves protected. But there are so many people now that they're kind of fatigued with it, and that they did a kind of lockdown, but they didn't do it properly. It didn't. It was always being undermined by the idiot of a president, and fatigue set in. And I heard of someone from favela near me who has COVID and is going to the beach. You're thinking, what on earth is in your head? Jesus. What on earth are you doing? So, we're around the 94,000 dead, and it ain't gonna. That death toll is rising, and it ain't gonna slow down anytime soon.
Yeah, it's depressing. It was. Remember when you were on I think it was April, when you were on the pod last, and you said that you fear it's going to get worse before it gets better, and obviously you were very much right. As with previous pods I've hosted out of Brazil during the COVID-19 pandemic, to thank Troy and Tim for coming on the pod, we will be making a donation in their name to the Morro do Coroa Favela Food Parcel Project I'm involved with. So we're putting food on the table for some of the hardest hit families in Brazil during the pandemic. So gents, thank you so much for this. It is making a difference. Cheeseheads, we will put the GoFundMe link in the pod bio and tweet it out as well. So do donate if you can.
Fantastic, brilliant.
Thanks. It's important. So thank you, both of you. We have so much to talk about, so much to cover, but let's start with this season. You're both huge Spurs fans. Troy, let's start with you. All things considered, looking at the season as a whole, the ups and downs, are you happy with how the season ended and where we finished?
That's probably the toughest question that you're going to ask me today, Brendan. I'm not sure totally as a Spurs fan you can be happy. It's, I look at this season in three elements, and all those three elements you kind of take into consideration. So obviously the Pochettino time for this season, which wasn't great. And obviously there's been some quotes from Maurizio just come out to say that he kind of preempted the start of the season the way it was and really putting the focus and the onus back on the board for not backing him. And I think any Tottenham fan will know that. But then you look at the quality in the side anyway, and then think, well, what happened there? Did they just down tools? Was the Champions League final the pinnacle? We didn't kick on from the Champions League final. And then, having a reputable manager like Jose come in, people got to realize that Jose, you get Jose Mourinho in, you know what you're getting. And I don't want anyone to be surprised about that. He had the original kick, which was to stabilize the team a little bit and to make sure that points were being put on the board. He was doing that in the way that only Jose Mourinho knows how to. It was never going to be easy on the eye. It was never going to be free flowing. He tried to do a bit of work in January. January didn't really work for the club, to be totally honest, but I don't think it should be what, Jose Mourinho is defined on for the best part of this season.
Sure.
And then you have the post, project restart, and just after being knocked out of the Champions League and the FA Cup, I think people were wondering what Project Restart was going to do. And apart from the Sheffield United defeat, and you think that if we had beaten Sheffield United and maybe got the penalty that should have happened in the Bournemouth game, that then would have meant that Bournemouth would have crumbled. I think people would have been happy with the pressure that we could have put on that top four place or top five place. But ultimately, it's a mad season. I don't think anyone else can call it that way. Having Amazon Prime being part of that mad season will make absolutely smashing TV for loads of people. But we've got to judge Jose on a full season in charge. And again, it's going to be a different kind of a season because there's not the big break that everyone wants. And there's not, the transfer window is going to be slightly different now. And what's he doing in that transfer window? So all in all, listen, Arsenal winning the FA Cup on Saturday makes it difficult, doesn't it? Because of the Europa League and where we have to start there. But listen, it's an acceptable season after the way that we started. It's not nothing amazing. You would want better from a Tottenham team, that's for sure. But listen, it's acceptable, I'd say.
Sure. Yeah, that it was almost inevitable that Arsenal would win the cup this weekend. So, Tim, how about you? When you were last on the show in April, you did mention your reservations about Jose. But looking at the post-lockdown section of the season, he had the key players back. The results, it wasn't pretty, as Troy said, but the results were there. You got the job done to an extent, no?
Yeah, I'll endorse a lot of what Troy said. Mourinho on his CV speaks for itself. You wonder if what he does is contemporary enough. In an age where so many games are becoming attack versus defence, you maybe have to be able to organise an attack rather than relying on a counter attack. But you know what he does, and well. But even when it's effective, and what he starts from a basis of the opposition and works back from the opposition. What have they got? What can we do to nullify it and counter it? And that it's brought him a lot of success. But it's not us, is it? And I love that Danny Blanchflower quote. It's our new tactics. We equalise before the other team have scored. And that's always been the way that we are. That little bit of swagger, and if it leads us to glorious defeats, we take them on the chin. So I'm yet to be convinced about the fit between Jose Mourinho and the identity of Tottenham. So I'm still in there. I'm still doubting. Happily there's some kind of competence there, but we're all about glory. And is he gonna give us enough glory? I have my doubts.
Sure. I think what
I mean, I think the past 5 years. Sorry to cut across you, Brendan. The past 5 years has brought us up on a style of play and an acceptance that we can be that brash, outgoing, easy on the eye kind of team. And so to not even transition from that into something that's still kind of acceptable to Tottenham fans is probably the hardest thing to take. But the beginning of the season wasn't great. We were playing in fits and starts. There were certain players who absolutely were not interested. You can tell the body language. You don't have to be a magician to tell the body language of some of the players and the way that they were going about their business. You looked at, there were a couple of defeats in there that were just unacceptable for a Tottenham team. I mean, you don't mind being beat by Bayern Munich, but being beat 7-2 at home in the Champions League, things like that. There would be serious questions leveled of anybody, and to get beat like that at home in a Champions League tie, the same Champions League that you were, reached the final of only 6 months previous, whether the players down tools, whether Maurizio had felt that he'd had enough and wasn't being backed and, didn't want to energize the team anymore. There was something fundamentally wrong there. Jose coming in at the time that he came in settled it a little bit, but like I said, and Tim's right, it's not the DNA of Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, but it's a kind of DNA you kind of have to accept now, because you bring Jose in, you know what you're getting. You start with a clean slate next season and hope that he brings, I don't know, what is acceptable for a Jose Mourinho to bring to Tottenham, because we never won the league. We never won the cups. I don't know, flattered to deceive, maybe in the Champions League more often than not, apart from the last season, So anything more than that, you have to credit the man with what he's doing. But it's one of them again. I like him as a manager, but I also feel that he's probably not updated himself, over the past few years to make him a competitive manager in the Premier League.
Yeah, he certainly has points to prove, and he was almost sort of gave up on this season. He was always talking about next season, always reminding us that he'd never joined a team midway through a season. So I guess next season we'll have to wait and see how it pans out. One of the many differences in the post-lockdown games has been the Black Lives Matter badges and players, staff, officials taking the knee in response to the global movement in the wake of the George Floyd murder in the US and obviously the subsequent protests around the world. Troy, was Kick It Out pushing that initiative, or was it led by the clubs or the players even?
Listen, I've got to say, I think the players have stepped up massively during this period of time. And at last they are being listened to, not just around the Black Lives Matter movement, but, they formed a group called Players Together, and we're raising funds or putting their funds, into the NHS, and they wanted to do it in their way. They didn't want to be told by anybody, and they didn't want to, people to take their money and to use it for other kind of devices. So that they put the Players Together initiative, with the hashtag and the brand, and it became the start of players having a voice. And, what happened out in America has kind of led to this wave of opinion let's just take sport for a start, this wave of opinion around sport that it wasn't doing enough. And the facts, the figures, the stats, the identities are there. Football hasn't done enough. Sport hasn't done enough when it comes to race issues, and football is obviously a massive part of that. And I'm proud of the players, the way they've taken it on board. It was Troy Deeney that put together the logo for the Black Lives Matter. And then, conversations at the highest level with the players involved to make sure that it was the knee that they wanted to do and wanted to continue. So, yeah, we applaud the Premier League and applaud the EFL and the FA, but it's the players that have driven that and kept it going. And for me, it's been every time I see the silence before a start of the game, it's a really powerful thing. Really, really powerful thing, and it doesn't lose its momentum the way that some people have said, the critics have said, because the critics are the ones that feel that the players shouldn't be doing it anyway, and Black Lives Matter don't matter. So it's really important, and the next part of it is what actions are going to come out of it, because we've done the solidarity bit, we've done the hashtagging bit, we've done the kind of representation bit in terms of everyone contributing for a common cause, but the next bit is the action bit. What will the boardrooms look like? What will the media look like? What will certain situations look like. And it's not just football. We see Lewis Hamilton having a battle in the F1. We see, I watched an interview with rugby lads from Huddersfield Giants the other day, and some of their experiences were pretty horrendous, and anyone that wants to understand why we are discussing Black Lives Matter as an initiative in football and in sport really needs to open their eyes up and listen to those kind of interviews to really appreciate and understand why so many people are now getting behind the initiative and movement and hoping for change.
Yeah. Well, we're an international pod, so many of our listeners around the world may not know much about Kick It Out, your role there. So would you mind explaining a bit about Kick It Out, about its history, its mandate, and a bit of insight into your role? I seem to remember from a previous pod that you kind of do everything. Well, you do a lot of things.
Yeah, we're English football's anti-discrimination organisation. So we obviously fight and battle against racism, but all forms of discrimination.
Sure.
We were formed in 1993. Our former chair, who only stepped down the best part of 18 months ago, Lord Herman Ousley, was being constantly contacted by black players, particularly saying, they were facing discrimination on football pitches up and down the English leagues, and they had no voice. They had no one to speak to. They had no one to speak on their behalf, and he formed the organisation, firstly called Let's Kick Racism Out of Football, as it was just racism we were focusing on. But then after a couple of years, we kind of realised that discrimination existed right across the board in the game,
Sure.
whether it be through homophobia, sexism, and he wanted to challenge all that. So we changed our name and our kind of narrative to Kick It Out, challenging all forms of racism and discrimination. And we've existed that way ever since. We're an organisation who challenges the industry to do better. We get criticised quite a lot. We're only a small charity with less than, I think we've got 16 members of staff, but yet we cover the professional game, the non-league game, the grassroots game. Work goes on in kind of like in the football environment, in the business side of the game, the mentoring side of the game, and the educational side of the game as well. So when I speak about my title as head of development, titles mean nothing. It's actually what you do as an individual to try and make the game an equal platform and provide that honesty within the game is probably the word that I would use, and it's a daily battle. It's a daily challenge. You wouldn't think so, but I'm telling you now, it's a daily battle and challenge to let this industry, the football industry, open its eyes up and understand not only the types of discrimination that happens in its stadium, that's happened on its football pitches, that happens obviously internationally. We see a lot of the former players that have played in the Premier League victimised on foreign soil. But just to make sure that we are representative as well. And, we look in the managerial circles and we look in the boardrooms, and seriously, there's a serious lack of representation there. Sure. And if there was better representation, would these issues be addressed differently, So I could speak all day about it, but I won't bore everyone to tears. But it's something where we kind of need the support and help of everybody around, particularly during this period of time, to kind of get together and show that solidarity that I've spoken about previously, and to really understand and appreciate that, one, we are all different, and two, we have different experiences, and no one should have to have an experience that makes them want to either turn away from the game or not want to work in the game anymore. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that I'd like to change.
Sure. Well, Tim, football has only just returned in Brazil. I think it was last week with the first round of games, and it just restarting the state competitions. Has there been a similar campaign for the Black Lives Matter movement in Brazil, or from the CBF, or from the players even here in Brazil?
Not really, for a number of reasons. And it is inspiring what the players of all nationalities in English football have done, the way that they've stepped up to the plate. Brazilian players don't have a similar history of being vocal. So also football hasn't come back on a kind of, it's come back on a state by state basis, and we're just about to start the National League this weekend.
Okay.
So it's been harder, I think, to coordinate a campaign across the nation when you've got football being played in some parts and not being played in others. And also there's the tragedy of the coronavirus, and so the minute silences and so on are going on beforehand are fall victims of of coronavirus, although that affects disproportionately people towards the bottom end of the social scale. Some clubs have made a point of bringing Black Lives Matter to the minute's silence beforehand. The majority haven't.
Why is that though, Tim? Why do you think that is? Is there an uncomfortableness around it, or just a lack of understanding or appreciation? Why do you think it is?
Many reasons. Many reasons. And firstly, I mean, there is the immediacy of the coronavirus tragedy, but the whole history. And I was going to get into this later on in the program. Let's do this now. The history of
Okay.
race in Brazil. It's a short perspective and a perspective from a white European who's lived here for 26 years, but it might help us a little bit along the way. There are similarities and differences between Brazil and the United States. One of the differences is just a huge number of Africans who were enslaved and came to Brazil. It's more than 5 times the number that came to Brazil than came to the United States. Had their identity. One of the tragedies of the American African descendants is the complete theft of identity, the complete lack of connection with, in the way that English blacks will have a connection with the Caribbean or with Africa. That just doesn't apply to the vast majority. Perhaps some in Brazil have been more successful in retaining some links with Africa, but it's very tenuous because you lose your identity, you lose your language, you're placed in groups of people with whom you don't share a language in order to try and prevent the danger of a slave rising. In some ways, Brazil to this day is traumatized by the possibility of a slave uprising. Slavery ended in Brazil very, very late, 1888, and it's not like the United States where it ends in conflict. You know, the American Civil War, which although those on the right of the debate in the United States will now say that was about states' rights, it wasn't about slavery. It's clear that what wasn't the case. Yeah. The slavery issue was absolutely key to the American Civil War. In Brazil, as in so many things, and there were movements to end slavery, but the real ending in 1888 was a top-down process. Granted by the royal family, who fell as a consequence. There's English pressure to end the slave trade to avoid competition with English commercial interests there as well, and the end of the abolition of slavery in Brazil didn't do a great deal to help the Afro descendants. I know you could argue that it didn't in the United States either, but at least in the United States there was a promise, the 40 acres and a mule promise, which was then broken, but that promise exists. The promise that became the civil rights movement. This constitution is not being obeyed. In Brazil, what happened essentially was that the Afro-descendant population were just forgotten. Let's forget about them. Let's forget they exist, and let's bring in a white European class. So Brazil imported huge, and millions came from Europe, from Italy, from Spain, from Germany, from Poland, from the Middle East, to form a new kind of white working class. And let's forget that these Afro-descendants ever existed. They're a kind of national stain. So the position of the now freed enslaved people was really dire, and that's comparatively recent. That's 132 years ago, and so little has been done to improve their lot since then. They remain on the bottom of society. I remember when I was a kid, all the black kids supporting Brazil, and it amazed me when I moved here just to see the racism. It just blew me apart, the racism that was just absolutely understood as being normal part of the social structure in Brazil, because it didn't tie in any way with the image of the country that I'd had. Why does that image exist? We'll just touch on that very, very briefly. Government in the 1930s and the 40s, when Brazil was forced to develop, you get the Wall Street crash, the collapse of international trade. Brazil is forced to develop. You get a kind of fascist government, but non-militaristic, and it made the black Brazilian an important part of the image of Brazil, in terms of musicality, happiness, Carnival. It's when Carnival became like state subsidized, but also state censored. And then because if you're a dictatorship, the image of a kind of happy, musical, singing, dancing population is very useful. Look at these people that don't need democracy. Look how happy they are. Look how and the idea of the Brazilian black was crucial to this idea of happiness, which Brazil then started selling as a tourist thing. I'm a little bit kind of mixed feelings about this, because at least on the one hand, the black Brazilian was included in the national imagination, and I think that's something. There's a feeling of belonging. There's something there. However, at the end of the day, you're still right on the bottom of society, and over the last few years, we've seen improvements on racism is a crime now in Brazil. In football, for example, clubs have been punished for the racism of their supporters. There was a club that was thrown out of the cup because its supporters were racist. You couldn't have believed that this would happen 40 or 50 years ago. That's clearly progress.
But I think, Tim, that doesn't even happen over here. That doesn't happen in England.
Right.
That kind of sanction doesn't happen.
On the other hand, that term that seems very complicated, but when you come down to it, it's very easy. Structural racism. I think we're going backwards with that. What does that mean? Structural racism. It means you can't get in the game. What do you need to get in the game? Yeah. You need capital, and you need capital, and capital can be divided into money, connections, or knowledge. And if you're on the bottom of the pile, you can't accumulate these things. All right, you can now with the internet and so on, and you can. Knowledge is easier to acquire, but rents have gone rocketed up. So if you're just paying your rent, you've got no money to accumulate the capital to buy you a stake in society, to get into those boardrooms and so on. You need money for education, because the public education system is so poor. How do you accumulate the capital to do that? It's a point I make to my stepdaughters all the time, and they're from the poor working class suburbs. And I've always done this with them. You take them places, and if it's like a nice place, an upmarket place, I look around and say, how many black people do you see here? And then I'll have a look. Yeah, no, there aren't any. No, the only black people you see here are behind the counter. Yeah. How do you get into the game? And that is the real problem. Just a couple of stories to emphasise this. I mean, when I was first here, I was going back 25 years now. I was giving English lessons to people in a financial market, and there was one guy who went to international meetings, and I don't think he was like a racist, but he'd been brought up as part of a social, very hierarchical social order. Now, Brazil has like tradesmen's entrance and so on that are for the black people. It's amazing. It's such a plantation vibe that you pick up loads of times. One of my stepdaughter's mates, she was beaten by her own parents for playing with black kids when she was little. It's just unbelievable stuff. You're thinking, what on earth is going on? But anyway, this guy at international meetings, and he confessed to me it was really hard for him to sit around these meetings and deal with black people on an equal level, because Brazil had never given him that experience, And there was a phrase he used that always stuck in my mind. He said, I was there. It was a black person who'd taken advantage of the English education system. It's as if it was somehow illegitimate in his mind, and he said, and he was quite open about it. And I don't think he's a bad bloke, but this is the experience that he's had. He said, I'm just accustomed to black people showing their subservience to me socially, and so it just freaked him out. There was another one he used to give lessons to who was black, white father, black mother, but very clearly black, and certainly very felt very, very black. And his way up had been through the armed forces, had been through the Air Force, and he told me that he goes back to the Air Force now and again, and he said, back in my day, and we're going back like 40, 50 years, he said, a third of the class of air cadets were black. Now I go back, we only see 2 or 3. We're going backwards because you need more money to get the educational level to get into the game. And that is the key problem. If it isn't just going to be wearing a T-shirt, if it is really going to change things, you've got to allow people to develop. I mean, I come from an era I was born in '65, a council estate kid. I didn't need that capital because it was all free. You know, university, they paid me to go to university. So I was able to get into the game on some level or other in a way that just doesn't apply anymore. So that's my fear, not just in Brazil, but in England as well, with everything that's happened politically in England over the last 40 years. My fear is that although on a kind of token level things have improved, not on many level things have improved, the real things of accumulating the capital to get into the game and to get into positions of power, I fear that we're going backwards.
Tim, I was just going to say that some people would absolutely be shocked, you know, some of what you've described there, the historical kind of situations and obviously present day. And I tell you now, they're very much replicated here in England. They're very much part of the system here in England. You know, they're very much that closed door environment exists so much. You know, I've seen far too many good people, you know, want to do well in this game, want to help and support football in this country, and the door just doesn't even get opened ajar. You know, they're dismissed. You know, they have a playing experience that should be allowed to transfer into something else, as long as, like you said, they do the education part of it. But the game doesn't see it over here, and I think we pay lip service far too much to the issues around discrimination and racism. Obviously, you know, something that is kind of never left these shores. You know, we were quiet about it for a little while. We talk up about it a little bit. We describe it in certain ways, particularly when it happens in Italy or in Spain or, you know, other European countries. There's outrage. There's outrage. But when it happens on our own doorstep, we make excuses. You know, and for me, that's the mark of how a nation deals with its problems, is when it lands on your own doorstep. You know, Gareth Southgate talks about it very well. You know, they want to talk to Gareth. You know, the situation out in Bulgaria, Gareth, you know, it was terrible, wasn't it? And Gareth's first comment always, well, we've still got our own problems over here, haven't we? You know, so I don't want to go two-footed in on Bulgaria, because I know some of my lads here have experienced the same situation. And where, you know, before COVID, we were on the back of a pretty horrendous season this season in England, a pretty horrendous season where, you know, a manager, Haringey Borough, not far from Tottenham, obviously has taken his team off a football pitch in an FA Cup tie. You know, we've had situations with, you know, fans in the Manchester derby. You know, we've had these situations quite a lot this season. Social media has blown up. But the players are still having to deal with it on a regular, the players are having to deal with it on a regular occurrence, rather than the authorities dealing with it and dealing with it in a manner that makes the players feel comfortable that action is being taken, you know. And until we get to a stage where we're changing that mindset, then we've got no right to be calling any other nation out for what they're doing in regards to racism.
You know, when I moved here in 94, I was really optimistic about what had happened to my country, because I remember one of the bad old days of the 70s when it was unbelievable. I can't believe any black person ever went to football. You know, the courage that the waves of hate that you could feel in a football stadium. Someone sent me actually last week an account, I think it might have been from Rosinha, Leo Rosinha, about playing at Leeds in the 70s or in the 80s.
Yes.
And the whole stand, Sig Heil, you know, giving the Sig Heil. You know, and I remember I was at Coventry. I was at college in Coventry, and the year that they beat us in the final of the FA Cup, '87. And I followed them all that year. Yeah, I followed them all that year and went up to the semi-final, which was against Leeds at Hillsborough, so this is as late as '87. And on the motorway there, lots of the Leeds fans are driven down just so they could abuse Coventry fans going up to Sheffield, singing "You've Got a Team Full of N-Words." But by '94, when I moved over here, my impression was that things have just moved so much in the right direction, and I was very smug about it for a long time. Only in over the last 10 years that I've thought, Christ, we hadn't made the progress that I thought we'd made. And one reason for that, I think, is politically. I mean, the right wing, and for ages. I mean, what was the basis of Thatcher's success? It was people buying their homes, and that was it. You know, you bought your home. Nowadays, the right wing doesn't have anything to offer. You know, because the price of houses and have just gone up so much that kind of dream that aspirational dream, if you like, isn't there anymore. So the right wing have got nothing to offer. So what do they do when they've got nothing to offer? They play the nationalism card, which is so often the racism card as well. And things have come back, you know. So we've gone so far backwards. Firstly, in that regard, and also in the fact, as I was saying earlier, the stepping stones that were there for my generation in terms of education and so it's not there anymore, you know. So what on earth do you expect? So we're going backwards socially, which obviously affects those who are on the bottom of the pile, which is the majority of the immigrant communities, and we're going backwards in terms of ideas because this horrible right-wing nationalism reasserts itself. The optimism that I had about my own country when I moved here in 1994, I don't have any more.
We're a Tottenham pod, and it wouldn't be right to talk about prejudice in football without mentioning Walter Tull. For those who don't know, on top of being a war hero, Walter Tull was Spurs' first black footballer, joined us in 1909, aged 21. He was only the second professional black footballer in the country to play in the top division and the first for more than 20 years. He went on to fight in World War I, and in spite of the 1914 Manual of Military Law forbidding, quote, any person of colour from becoming an officer, Tull was such an inspiring leader they broke the code. He became the first British-born black officer in the British Army to lead soldiers into battle. He was killed in action in 1918. His remains were never recovered. There are so many firsts to his story. It's a fascinating story. Even in 1909, he was described in the press as a model for all white men who play the game. He was subjected to horrible racist abuse while playing for Spurs when we played against Bristol City, and he lost his place in the team because of that. Troy, what are your thoughts on Tull and his inspiring story? Do enough people know about this story as well?
Well, I was going to say that, Brendan. It's, you know, you think about it, how often is Black history taught? So, you know, let's talk generally. How often do we understand and appreciate Black history, Black pioneers, people who have paved the way so that, you know, the likes of me and my generation and the generation before mine can actually be a part of this footballing industry? We tell them when it's too late. Well, not when it's too late. It's always good to know their stories, but we tell them when the significance and the power of the story, not that it's been lost, but you kind of think, well, why weren't these stories being told before? Why do we not know about Walter Tull, and why do we not know his story? I'm going to go a little bit further. Why are there statues of slave owners, but yet there's not a statue of a pioneering footballer who also, he went to World War I and he fought for his country, you know, and the acts of discrimination that he faced, you know, wouldn't only just be because he was black and part of football, but definitely being black in the British Army as well would have, I can't even imagine what he may have had to gone through, but yet still wanting to inspire his team, his group, his soldiers into battle, whether it be on the football pitch or whether it be on the front line, you know. And it pains me to understand why Black history is not recognized until hundreds and hundreds of years later, or decades later, and we don't celebrate. It's not celebrated in a way, and maybe that nationalism is all part of it. Black people are not deemed to supposed to be British. They're not deemed to kind of be part of the English history, you know, and you can't have positive black role models in English history. Well, actually you can, because if people wanted to go back into history, they'll realize that, you know, there's not only a Walter Tull, there's so many others, you know, great people that have inspired many to try and believe in their dreams and achieve. You know, I'm part of a campaign at the moment around Jack Leslie, sorry, who you know, unbelievably had his England call up taken away from him because they realized that he was black. They didn't realize before, but they finally realized. And that campaign is to get Jack Leslie recognized, you know. And that's not part of Tottenham history, but that's part of English history.
Sure.
And you know, even down to, you know, recent years, you'll see a lot of projects around Walter Tull and understanding. But I just want to know why it's taken so long. What part of this country, this land, do we not want to recognize perceived difference in people, you know? But the fact that they're here to serve and here to make this country great, you know. I was born in England. I'm British. I'm a black British man, but yet nearly on a daily occurrence, I know that I'm different. On a daily occurrence, I'm taught that I'm not part of British culture. I'm not part of the kind of history of this country, and whether that be in my minimal role in football, or whether that just be me as a black man in society that, you know, travels and does the work that he does around education, etc. I absolutely know that I am different on a daily occurrence, and those are the battles that we have to fight through. And you have to be a certain kind of person to be able to understand that, and then drive yourself through it to want to achieve and try and help people appreciate and understand as well. So, you know, Walter's story is an amazing one, and one that should be on a much bigger platform. But my concern is, why has Black history almost been eliminated from the history books, to the point where we're having to rewrite it now so that this generation can understand the impact that that man had, you know?
You know, I would love, as a compulsory part of the education system, for everyone to do a DNA test.
Oh, you're a man after my own heart, Tim, I tell
Yeah,
you.
because I mean, because what
Yeah.
we are, we are an island of immigrants. It's
Yep.
one wave coming in and another wave coming in and another wave coming in. And Walter Tull, his story is a part of my story. I can't know my story in its entirety if I don't know the story of him. He is one river that flows into our ocean. You know, one of the stories, I've only found this out recently, you know, but when the police are hunting like terrorist suspects or so on, when they're interviewing him, one of the questions they often ask is, do you like Dad's Army? And if you like Dad's Army, you're like one of us, you know, and if you don't, then culturally you're not, you know.
Yeah.
That the song at the start of Dad's Army, you know, who do you think you are kidding, Mr. Hitler?
Well, you're bringing back
That's
memories, Tim.
that's the last thing that was recorded by Bud Flanagan, who was part of the Flanagan and Allen double act. Now, Bud Flanagan was born Chaim Reuben Weintraub. He's a descendant. He's the son of Polish Jews. So this thing, which is so English, this theme tune to Dad's Army, it's the product. The song is the product of an immigrant. Yet another one. So many. We're immigrant island. That DNA test, I think it would do away with this horrible thing about you're not English. As if, you know, you don't belong into the story. Like, you know, the actor, I'm not even going to say his name because I can't remember. He's part of the Fox dynasty or whatever, you know, who was moaning about a First World War film showing Sikh soldiers and saying political correctness gone mad, you know. No, it's his own idiocy gone mad. He doesn't know his own history. He doesn't know, you know, and so that's a level I think it's so important to fight.
But you know what? Knowing your own history is a beautiful thing, and you can learn it at any stage, by the way. You know, you don't have to, you kind of have to delve into if you want to work into your family tree or take the test, as they say, do that and then delve into the different parts of our makeup, because, you know, I've got Scottish blood in me. That's one of the things I do know. And that's because my family were bought, you know, when they were living in the West Indies, what money was paid for my family to come over and work in Scotland, you know, and the things that used to go on there were unbelievable, to the point where, you know, my last name Townsend is my slave name, you know, and that's because my ancestor was constantly raped by the white paymaster.
Bloody hell.
You know, and then you bear a child and you take on the name of the paymaster, and I should hate my last name, if you want me to be totally honest. I should absolutely hate it. But for what my ancestors would have had to have gone through for me to exist, you embrace it, and then you want to find out a little bit more about your own personal history, you know. And if we all took a moment to realize that and appreciate where we all come from, like you say, Tim, I think we'll all kind of look at each other in the eyes and go, do you know what? We're exactly the same. But I think there's a fear around people wanting to do that. There's a fear around knowing their historical background. There's a fear around the understanding that, you know, you're not fully English, you know, you could come from many, many different parts and many, many different makeups, because your family tree would have existed from, you know, from way back when. That will be the scary part, because it might make people open their eyes up and then appreciate and understand that we're all the same somewhere along the line. You know, but I think
far enough, Troy, and we're all out of Africa.
Well, there you go, Tim. Exactly. There you go. There you go. But you say that to some people, and that will be it. They'll run a mile,
Yeah. Well,
and they'll want to go and clean themselves.
you mentioned there, Troy, about your surname. Tim, I'm a huge fan of your podcast that you do, the Brazilian Football Shirt podcast with Dr. Adebayo. It's like a musical journey through key footballing events through history. But what I found fascinating was in episode 1, you spoke about the Brazilian football shirt. Obviously, it's the name of the podcast. Why Brazilian footballers have tended to opt for a first name or a nickname. So Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, etc. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, it's got lots to do with what Troy just told us. Remember the huge quantity of Africans who were enslaved in Brazil, and they're robbed of their identity. They're robbed of their names, and so they take on the names of their owners. Now, the Portuguese tradition of names is very, very long. And very, very complicated. There's about 7 or 8 names, just to make one name. Yeah. So it's an obvious thing to do, to simplify it. And it's something that happens very commonly to. It's happened to footballers. It's happened to entertainers and so on. But what is depressingly interesting, I think, is that quite often when they become managers, football coaches, suddenly they're given first name and last name. Like he was when he played, he was Zagallo, and he won the World Cup for Brazil in 58 and 62. When he becomes a coach, then he's Mario Zagallo. He's kind of he's crossed the factory floor, if you like, and this is a big issue in Brazilian football, because how many black coaches do you see? Yeah. Very, very few. There are a couple now, but this is a disgrace to Brazilian football. When you look if you look just a little bit further north, or from me, not necessarily from you, Bren, but Colombia, and Colombia is a very socially conservative country, but Colombia has often, when I've been there or when I'm watching games there, I'm struck by the fact that both the coaches are black. You just don't see that in Brazil. Yeah. That's so rare. So that there is again that the difficulty that black players have had crossing the floor. It's something that doesn't just exist in England. It exists in Brazil. And remember, the main black community in England is a post Second World War thing. The black community in Brazil have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. So that I think that's a disgrace for the Brazilian game. The paucity of black coaches.
Yeah. Well, we'll stick on that subject now. We're going to talk about it later on, but we may as well, we're talking about it now. So let's look at that. I mean, Troy, we saw that Jose has recently promoted Ledley King to a more senior role in his management setup, which every Spurs fan obviously is delighted to see. Ledley King is a hero. Do you see Ledley as a future Spurs manager? And is enough being done by the big clubs to give retiring black players a chance to learn the managerial ropes in the high-pressure environment of the Premier League? And surely that would sort of assist with the dealing with the loophole in the Rooney Rule, which we'll talk about as well. And it was sort of almost like a trickle-down effect. Do you think big clubs have a responsibility to do more?
God, there's a lot to unravel in that, Brendan. No, that's fine, because let me answer the Ledley King bit first, because it's probably the easiest bit to answer. It's great to see Ledley, eventually we'll be seeing him involved in the first team environment. From what I understand, it's not as a coach. So that in itself, has its own makeup. They lost a technical analyst, and by all accounts, Ledley's coming in as a technical analyst. What that means is that you've got an absolute legend of the football club in and around the first team players, in and around the staff. He's the football club is embedded in who he is. He will bring a lot of appreciation and understanding to the players about the enormity of playing for Tottenham. How success, is something that you really have to strive for, and you have to be on it. Hopefully, if he has that day-to-day contact, and I mean that absolutely coaching element of it, he'll be able to help our centre-half become better centre-halves, because at the moment I think they're all over the place. And, in the way that he approached the game, he's not spoken at the highest level because of his dodgy knees. But for me, Ledley King was one of the purest centre-halves that we've had, and should have absolutely been, be spoken about in the high circles of the game. So yes, that must be of massive benefit, and I would imagine he would be of massive influence as well, because of obviously his kind of name, but also the enormity of who he is as a Tottenham Hotspur representative as such. So to have someone like that within that first team structure and environment, and let's wait for the definition of what the role actually
Sure,
is.
yeah.
But yeah, that would be brilliant. The other aspect you talk about, we haven't got long enough to disseminate because it's one of my biggest bugbearers is how the game, the lack of appreciation for black players once they finish the game, the lack of talking about black players with intelligence whilst they're playing the game, the lack of the Premier League taking ownership around not only the Rooney Rule, which it wouldn't implement in its own division, but would allow it to be implemented in with the other 72 football clubs. They've got this new coaching structure, which apparently is driven, or opportunities, which is driven by the Premier League. But yeah, you won't be allowed to invoke it in the Premier League. So 6 coaches getting the opportunity for 23 months to get experience throughout all levels of coaching circles, but only in football league clubs. So there is your issue, is the fact that the Premier League will not adopt any of these initiatives because the elite level, this is what it says to me, the elite level of the game is not for black coaches.
Jesus.
That's absolutely what it says to me, is that, yeah, you can ply your trade down in the Championship, League One and League Two, but you're going to have to go some to even get anywhere near our clubs. And for me, that is an absolute disgrace.
Yeah.
I know that we're on the edge of losing another generation of good black coaches who are fed up with the system, fed up with the game over here, and decide. Look at Eddie Newton recently,
Yep.
only of the weekend, won the Transpons. I just say,
Trabzonspor.
Tim, you're much better than me. There you go. You're much better than me at that. But he's gone and won the cup over there, the Turkish
I
cup.
didn't even know he was a manager.
And,
I was like, that's Eddie Newton. I can't remember he used to play for
Eddie
Chelsea.
Newton. He used to play for Chelsea, was on the staff at Chelsea, then was a loan manager at Chelsea, then disappeared.
Yeah.
No one knew where he went. Now, what he said is that he was applying for jobs and no one was giving him an opportunity. I'm not being funny. He was at Chelsea Football Club,
Yeah.
Doing what he's doing. And even if it was to get a League One or Championship job, he's got some credibility behind him. But there's like Michael Johnson, who's, another coach who had to go abroad in Guyana and manage them in the Gold Cup and can't get opportunities over here. So our coaches are now deciding that, forget England, we might as well uproot our families and go and try somewhere else where they're a little bit open towards us. And I'd question anybody that tell me that that's not to do with the colour of one's skin.
Yeah.
I hear Simon Jordan a lot talk about, show me the qualifications, show me that these players take their badges. That is a load of crap, because the players with all good intentions come out the game the same like their white counterparts to want to try and add value at a coaching level from their experience of playing the game.
Yeah.
And they're being denied opportunity. And I have the facts in front of me, but I'm not going to give them to someone who's just going to spout off and say, oh, here you go again. I listen to these coaches. I hear what their frustrations. I hear what they say. Turn up to interview, when they look at who's interviewing, they say, I don't even know why I bothered today.
Yeah.
Some of them don't even get any feedback from their applications.
There was reports last week about Paul Elliott. The FA tried to promote him to be a full board member, but it was blocked by the Premier League and the EFL, which I didn't understand that at all. Troy, I'm sure you kept up with the story much more than I have. Can you explain the situation? I don't understand why there was such opposition to Paul being made a full board member.
Well, it's all been retracted, and this is the thing. It's all been retracted now. And Greg Clark, who wrote the letter and open letter and said how disappointed he was, has now retracted what he said, which tells you that something's going on, doesn't it? Right. Do you know what I mean? So he would have known that the FA and the Premier League representatives voted against Paul going on the board. So he would have known. Right. He would have been in dialogue with all bodies. Why is this? What's the problem? Why is this not going to happen? So he now writes, let's be serious. These people of that stature will get all their facts right first, and then he puts an open letter out. That open letter, he then has to put another statement out to retract the comments that he put out in the open letter because the Premier League are not happy with him.
Because he,
So everything around like open opportunity, equality of opportunity, racism, there's always a legal issue that stops it from progressing in a way that it should. And I cannot understand what this game is doing at the moment. The hashtags are great. The commitments are two different things. Yeah, we support Black Lives Matter. Well, show us how you're supporting it. Stop paying lip service and show us how you're doing it.
yeah.
And I'm not expecting things to happen overnight, but I'm tired and fed up of the battles that continue to happen when there's issues and stories around equality for all in football, and that's all we're asking for. We're asking for a level playing field, a playing field that means that I can get a job just like my white counterpart. And if I'm experienced and I'm skilled and I've done the qualifications, then why am I being overlooked time and time and time again, where I get fed up and I get bored and I move on somewhere else?
Would you encourage Andros to go into management when he hangs up his boots?
Oh, you really got me here, haven't you? I was asked the question not too long ago, and of course I'd still encourage him, because if that's what he wants to do, then why wouldn't you encourage your son,
Sure.
your child to believe in their dream? By the way, I'd be there in terms of I'd let him know the pitfalls, but also you'd let him want to, like he went into the career as himself. My career didn't pan out the way I wanted it to, but his did. And it had many ups and many downs, and you just make sure as a family and as a parent that you're in and around them when the good times are there, but also when the bad times are there. So I wouldn't stop him from doing it if that's what he really wanted to do, because he would be ambitious and would want to try his luck. And why wouldn't he?
Sure. Yeah, no, I listened to some of his interviews. He gave one last week, and he's very open about his battles, because he was king of the world in 2013-14 when he made his England debut, scored on his debut, set up another goal in the Tottenham team regularly, gets injured, has a loss in form as a result of that, moves on, and he's very open about his ups and downs. I didn't want to focus on Andros just because you're on the pod, but
No, you know what? All I would say, Brendan, I don't think people really appreciate. Yeah, he was on a high, and it was an unbelievable period of time that he was everything he touched turned to gold. And you have those moments, but I don't think people really appreciated the two injuries that he got. One was in Tim Sherwood's first game in charge after Villas-Boas got the sack.
Yeah.
And he got an hamstring injury in the League Cup against West Ham, and then he won, with pace, and you get a hamstring injury, and it was a proper tear as well. He came back from that slowly but surely, and obviously the World Cup is a massive goal as he helped England get there, and away day at Stoke, and Eric Peters absolutely takes him out. And he done his ankle, and it put him out of the World Cup, and he struggled because he went out to the World Cup to commentate. I thought he did an absolutely great job and did his rehab out there, but he struggled from being so close to the action without being able to play. And as a youngster, that can have a massive impact on you, but he also struggled to recover properly from the injury. So as he said, he had to change his running style and running action to incorporate not only the hamstring injury, which was massive, but then also the damage to his ankle. And I remember watching him come back in his first preseason, and I just said, he's not right. He's not running right. Have they done that operation properly? And I don't think people really truly realise the impact of how injuries can play you. And he lost half a yard, and in losing half a yard, that explosiveness to get away that smashed him onto the scene had gone a little bit, and he had to absolutely remanage how he was running, which then you need to remanage how your playing style is as well. And I don't think, and why would people want to appreciate and understand that? They just want to make sure that you're playing for 90 minutes, and if you're playing well, or if you're not playing well, it gives them an opportunity to criticise, But yeah, it was absolutely a tough time for him.
Well, thanks for allowing the Andros segue there, Troy. You're your own person. We're delighted to have you on, but I'm a huge fan of Andros, so that's why. Tim, Troy mentioned that the last 18 months, it's almost felt like there's been an increase in abuse from the stands when fans were there, or at least increased reporting. I mean, we could go on, but there was Bulgaria. There was the incident in Portugal with Marenga, who was sort of being pushed back on the pitch by his own teammates. And he was like, no, I want to get off the pitch. I'm not standing for this. There was also Tyson Shakhtar, who was sent off for responding to the racist abuse that he got. And Tyson was quite a big player here in Brazil too. He won the Copa Libertadores with Internacional before he moved to the Ukraine. Have you spoken to him? Have you met him? And how was that incident reported in Brazil?
No, I've never spoken to him. Quite often, a sad thing about the way that these incidents are reported in Brazil is it's reported through a perspective of nationalism. This is a Brazilian suffering discrimination, and not this is a black Brazilian suffering discrimination. Okay. That kind of perspective. I don't know if you remember this. A few years ago, there was a Libertadores game between São Paulo of Brazil and Estudiantes of Argentina. And at the end of the game, an Argentine centre-back, Alberto, was arrested and spent the night in the cells accused of racist abuse. And one of the things that came out in the discussion, and it's always good to bring these things to the surface and have a discussion, was there was a black player from São Paulo saying, when we play other Brazilian teams, and he mentioned another Brazilian team, and he said, you couldn't believe the racist abuse that we get subjected to by this particular Brazilian player. And I was thinking, well, why is that never ever reported on? Why is it only ever reported on if it's an Argentine abusing a Brazilian? So the thing of nationalism can often get in the way of an honest discussion about race. And I think that was probably the case in the thing with Tyson. It's more seen as a Brazilian being discriminated against than a black person being discriminated against.
See, Tim, I would never have understood that. You know, you kind of, from my perspective, you look at it, and I use that actual situation in some of my education sessions. And obviously, you talk about a black Brazilian playing in Ukraine getting racially abused. And I never connect it to like you've just said, the kind of nationalism in how it's reported back home. So to appreciate that and understand that is an interesting thing. Brendan, I just wanted to say about that Marega situation. I don't know about you, Tim, but that was one of the worst things I've seen on a football pitch. Yeah. And the reason why it's one of the worst things I've seen is because, you know, he was targeted because of the colour of his skin, targeted as a former player. Targeted not only by fans who not only were they racially abusing him, but they were tearing off the seats to throw at him. Jesus. He wanted to leave the field of play because he had enough. His teammates were stopping him. The opposition was stopping him. His goalkeeper was pointing to his head as if to say he's lost the plot. He was then ostracized by his manager. He was then pulled back again by his teammates. The camera panned to the boards, so the dignitaries, and you could see the disgust on their face for what he was doing. Jesus. And I would have asked anybody, stand in the middle of the football pitch and be abused, not criticised. Criticise is one thing, but abused because of the colour of your skin by the opposition fans, by, in the end, your own fans, by your teammates, by the opposition, by the officials, by your management, and by the dignitaries up there. And tell me what you would want to do. It was an absolute disgrace. Absolute disgrace. And some of the messages afterwards, you know, yeah, we don't condone this. You condoned it because you left him out there by himself. Yeah. Left him, and the impact of that, the mental well-being behind that. I mean, I don't know. I don't think people understand what they do to players sometimes, because as far as they're concerned, the players have all the money in the world, so they should be able to accept the kind of abuse that they get, whether it's just normal abuse as such as shouting at them, or whether it's abuse of a discriminatory nature.
In England, we're far from innocent here as well, and Spurs too. Like, we've seen a few incidents involving Spurs in the last season and the season before. Obviously, we saw Claude on AFTV using the DVD slur against Son. Then there's the banana skin incident at the Emirates in 2018, I think that was. Anthony Rudiger's claims he was subjected to monkey chants in the Chelsea game in December, where a Chelsea fan was also charged with racially abusing Son. There's so many. What first of all, what do you make of those incidents? And have you, as a Spurs fan and also father of a former Spurs player, witnessed racism at a Spurs game?
I've witnessed on a couple of occasions. I remember Lazio coming in the UEFA Cup. I think it was still called the UEFA Cup then. And Andros, Defoe, Aaron Lennon. Every time you remember the old White Hart Lane and the away fans where they were pushed in the corner.
Yeah.
And the Lazio fans were very vocal. But every time Andros, Lennon, Aaron Lennon or Jermaine Defoe went to take a corner, you get monkey chants, as the players were going over. Absolutely nothing done at all.
There was no punishment for that?
No punishment. Nothing. No punishment. I mean, I was right over. So they were in one corner flag. I was directly over the other corner flag on an angle, and I can hear it.
Jesus.
So if I can hear it, I'm damn sure the officials could hear it, and the fourth officials, etc. I remember walking out of a game as well. It was a pre-season friendly. It might have been Southend. I'm sure someone's going to say Troy. We've never played Southend pre-season friendly, but I think it was Southend. And I could hear the chant of Yido, and I knew it wasn't an adult voice. And so I'm walking out, and this chant is getting louder and louder. And then when I turned round, the kid could no more than 6. If he was 6, he's pushing it. And he was leading the chanting of the Spurs fans of Yido. Now, I know there's lots of controversy about Yido. There's the ownership part of it. There's the other part of it. Well, people are just not having it. But for a 6-year-old, and again, I think I'm being kind in his age, to be leading the singing of Spurs fans of Yido as we're walking out of the ground with the connotation that it has, there's your ingrained behavior. There's your, because that child who probably now is about 12, 13, he's been taught that is acceptable and it's what we sing, and it's who we are. And whether people think it's right or wrong, to educate them at that age, to be able to acknowledge that and to be able to be at the forefront of singing it whilst the adults around you laugh. And I cannot get my head around it. The Rudiger situation, I mean, it led me to fall out with friends who are Tottenham supporters, because as far as they're concerned, it just does not happen on Tottenham's patch. Tottenham are not a racist football club. And I always have to direct back, well, who threw that banana at Aubameyang in December 2018 then? Yeah. Wasn't that a Tottenham fan? So don't tell me that we all have a core of fans, unfortunately, minority or not, who have those intentions in them, whether it be through language, whether it be through actions, whether it be through written word on social media. But the fact that they all came out and said, I was the problem, because I did an interview that kind of backed Rudiger and said that we need to find the fan. And I'm in communication with Tottenham, I'm in communication with Chelsea, I'm in communication with a couple of fans who say they were around that area as well. And by the way, another fan was ejected for using the N-word in that game as well.
Really?
Right next to, apparently, the fan. Yep, another fan was ejected. So whilst this kind of mentality of, no, it doesn't happen on our patch, that's why we'll never actually get rid of racism and discrimination. Now, the people that say, well, in 40 years, I've never heard nothing, but you only sit in one section of the ground. So I just don't understand why, if someone has called out an experience while he's playing the game, by the way, why we can acknowledge it and at least go, well, that's horrendous, man. That shouldn't be happening at Tottenham. We're a proud football club. And regardless of who it is, we have that minority that still exists in our stadiums, as been proved by the wave of incidents that have happened throughout the whole of this season.
Moving on to TV, there was the recent run-repeat study from a research group in Denmark on football commentary and racial bias. It analysed 2,000 statements made by commentators in 80 matches in Premier League, La Liga and League One, or Ligue 1. It found, for example, that when talking about intelligence, that the majority of praise went to players with a lighter skin tone, and the majority of criticism went to players with a darker skin tone. Some more predictable outcomes were words like power, speed, physique, were all attributed to players with a darker skin tone, and work ethic, hard work, leadership, attributed to lighter skinned players. Tim, is it similar in Latin America?
A certain fella called Pele killed off a lot of that, didn't he? Because
I think I remember him, Tim, somewhere along the line.
You may well do. Yeah, you go down the list of all of those things. Right, power, speed, physique, tick, tick, tick. Work ethic. You try and outdo Pele on work ethic, hard work.
Yeah.
intelligence, and Pele was playing 1-2s off the ankles of his opponents. Extraordinary. Leadership is leadership. And here I'm going to make it depressing again, because you will also remember Pele's mate and his captain in the 1970 side, Carlos Alberto, the right back, who scored that fantastic last goal. Now, Carlos Alberto is clearly Afro-Brazilian, but when he was a coach, and I remember him invading the field, yelling racist abuse at someone, at the referee, who was also Afro-Brazilian, was a darker Afro-Brazilian, and that's one of the things in Brazil. Exactly where you draw the line makes it difficult. But just in terms of football, Pele kind of killed that one off. But the one that the racists clinged onto for a fair while, and some will still cling onto it, is goalkeepers. Yeah. The idea, and a bit of this comes from Brazil losing the 1950 World Cup on home soil, when the goalkeeper, who was fantastic, he got beat on his near post. Barbosa, he was black. He ended up burning those goalposts a few decades later. Wow! Because he said, the maximum crime in Brazil is like 30 years, and I've done 40 for a crime I didn't commit. So he was never able to forget it. And the idea that black goalkeepers suffered real prejudice. The idea being, it's a position that needs a cool head and decision making, and so the black stereotypes that because of Pele they couldn't use about players out on the field, they would use them about black goalkeepers.
Okay.
Troy, what were your thoughts on?
I mean, no, it didn't teach me anything new.
Right.
So the report kind of just nailed it in terms of what we've been saying for a very, very long time. The comparison of black players to white players in England there is no comparison. There in my day, it would always be the big black lad at the back smashing the ball down the pitch to the quick black lad up front, and that narrative has been used and subtly changed to power and pace. Mm-hmm. That narrative is now used to describe Adama Traore at Wolves as if he has no other attribute. Let's be serious. Yes, he's a physically powerful specimen, isn't he? You look at Traore and you think to yourself, wow, okay, you wouldn't want to get on the end of when he's trying to slow down, but he's got more than just power and pace. Look at the finesse in his crosses. Yeah. Look at the partnership he has with Jimenez. Look at the way that he played Palace recently and had the unfortunate pleasure of watching him skip between two players where there was no space to skip in between, cutting the ball back for a miscued shot that then saw the ball finally end up in the back of the net. But there was no kind of description of that kind of subtle bit of skill, the quick footwork, the intelligence to pull the ball back to the edge of the box. It's just described. It was described as, look at the power and pace of Traore. And even his own football club cut a clip. The clip was absolute nonsense, by the way. He carried the ball from inside his own half of the box in the opposition half and got fouled, got a free kick. Okay, he drove past 4 players, but it was nothing out of the ordinary, and they just described it as the power and pace of Traore. So the little subtle things remain. I had the pleasure of talking to the Sky Sports pundits, team, staff about this very topic, and a lot of them were discussing it, and I don't think they really understood where I was coming from. I don't think they really, Troy, there's nothing wrong with power and pace. What's the problem with that? What? And I just said, because you offer nothing else. You offer nothing else to describe the narrative of the player. And again, you're quite right, Brendan, there. You look at a Yaya Toure and all his qualities, although I think him and David Silva, they're different players, but you look at all Yaya's qualities and yet look at how he will be described. Yeah. And just the last one on this, there's a player that contacted me, and I don't listen to football on the radio, but there was a player that contacted me saying he's got a complaint. And I said, yeah, go on, what's that? And he said he was described in the pre-match build-up by a reputable commentator who used to be on the BBC. So I'm narrowing it down quite a lot here. I think he's retired now. And as he was going down the list, as you do on radio, number 3, blah, 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 stocky left back with a lovely left foot or whatever else, he was named as the lad of power and pace. And he said to me, Troy, that's not even me. I've got so much more to my locker than that. but it was a family member that told him and said, "Are you having that? Are you having being described in that way?" Because that is preempted. That's lazy homework. That's someone who's not even bothered to kind of find the right terminology or descript to define the player. So let me just throw in power and pace. People will get what I mean.
Yeah.
And I just think there's now, you move on in time. We always move on. So we find new descriptives, new narratives, new stories. Why can we not just change that narrative around the black player and give them a few more of the qualities that their white counterpart can have as well?
Yeah. Well, staying on TV, Troy, do you take comfort in seeing TV punditry a lot more diverse than in previous years? In the 90s, I think we just had Garth Crooks, maybe John Barnes now and again. Robbie Earle started in TV pretty much straight after he stopped playing. But the numbers were low. And you look now, we have Michael Richards, Jermaine Genius, Ian Wright, Eni Aluko, Clinton Morrison, Dion Dublin, Patrick Severa, Rio, Darren Bent, Alex Scott, so many. And then it's not tokenism. They are genuinely the best at what they do. They're the pinnacle of their fields. Are you heartened by that? Is that progress?
I'm going to ask you a question. How many of them host the shows? That's all I'm going to say. Yes, I'm heartened a little bit, but when are we going to get to a stage when they can actually host a show?
Yeah, well,
if they are that good at what they're doing, and you're right, they all contribute in a great way, but there's a few of them there that are outstanding. Outstanding. So why are we not hosting shows?
Yeah.
Why are they not given the opportunity to present?
Yeah.
So listen, you've got to remember we're in 2020 at the moment. This shouldn't, the black face shouldn't be a new thing. It shouldn't be like, rolled out like, God blimey, there's a lot more of them on there now, isn't there? So it's taken us till 2020 to see a little bit of better representation. But again, the top job, the hosting job, the presenter job, the elite job. Oh no, we're not ready to give that up yet. We're not ready to give them that yet.
No.
That's the one. And I know people may think that I'm negative a lot, but I'm going to say it again. We're in 2020. Black players have been playing in this country for many, many a year. And we're only now seeing opportunity arise, and it's opportunity where, yeah, you can talk about the game, but we won't get you hosting about the game. Yeah, we'll get you on a panel, but you won't be the presenter. Sorry, Tim, where you go.
I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. I think the point is valid, but I'm going to disagree just a little bit. And that is that I think there are different skills there. The presenter is one skill and the pundit is another skill. Presenting, I think, is really, really difficult. And I believe that the presenter, in the majority of situations, is better as a journo than an ex-player. And even Lineker, who has become a good presenter, and he was crap. And he would tell you that he was crap for years. He had to learn how to do it. So the problem here, I think, is why aren't there more black journo presenters?
Yeah,
I think that the presenter thing doesn't have to be. In fact, I think the presenter is probably better if it's not an ex-player. Where are the black journo presenters? There are one or two at Sky and so on, but there are very, very few.
I'm not going to argue there, Tim.
and this comes back to a point that I was making earlier on about journalism now. It's almost all middle class. Because you need that capital to get in the game. You need the money, you need the connections, and so on. This I think is an absolute disgrace. And you can see it in the tone of what some of the written press write and broadcast. We will remember a day when the journos and the players came from very similar backgrounds, or many of them did, and so there was more understanding. But now you see a lot of the journos, everyone is like public school and so on, and they're from a totally different background from the players of whatever colour. And so there is just this chasm of misunderstanding. So that I think is the problem there with the presenters, that there's not enough, because it's become increasingly hard now with student debt and all the rest of it. It's harder to get in the game. And I think that and this is where the problem that the footballers have getting jobs in management is the same as the problem that the black working class kid has getting into the game as a journalist.
I'm not going to argue with there at all, Tim. I think that's a very, very valid point. I'd also like to say that there is a little bit of change happening over here, where the young black creative mind is now creating their own content,
Mm.
and they're not waiting
Yeah.
to get
Yeah.
opportunities anymore.
Right
They're
on.
deciding to go, do you know what? We've got our own platforms. We're now going to create content. And it's interesting to see the amount of players that are now going onto these, you know, YouTube channels or Insta lives with the way the creativity is going, and they feel actually more comfortable in terms of having topics of discussion because they're not
Obviously, yeah.
overpowered
Brilliant.
by a media representative of the club or anything like that. So I think what's happening, particularly here in England, and it may be happening, you know, globally, I'm not sure, but is that the content creators are now doing it by themselves. And it's funny because you now actually see Sky Sports taking some of that content that they've created and using it on their major platform, you know. And if you've done that, if you've managed to get Sky Sports taking your content, crediting you
Mm.
and putting it out, you know, on that live sports feed, then you must have done something good. So there's definitely a sea of change happening.
Yeah, certainly.
Brilliant.
And shout out to Expressions there as well. I think Expressions is the Tottenham one that we can look to. Like you said, created his
Yeah.
own. He's not for everyone. I find him very funny. But he's like you said, he's created his own platform and done very well out of it. His
Yeah.
stats are incredible, and fair play to him.
Do you know what, Brendan? I would never knock anyone. I would never knock anyone for doing that. I would never knock anyone for creating their own content and their own earning potential. You know, it's something that Tim's kind of drummed on about, you know, how do you manage to do that?
Mm.
And they've done it in their own style, in their own way. Listen, it may only last a short period of time, by the way, because you know how fickle this industry is. But while the going is good and while your content is relevant, take it for every opportunity you can.
Just to wrap up, Troy, I know you need to get on. Danny Rose recently came out with some quotes in his sort of typically refreshing, open way. He spoke about racism this week, and it was it was depressing read also. But I mean, he talked about being stopped pretty much every time he goes back to Doncaster to visit family. Not that a black man being stopped in a fancy car is exclusive to Doncaster. It was just his story. To the point where he doesn't like driving there. He takes the train, and even there, he has the less overt racism of, you do know this is first class. And what struck me was that he sounded worn down. He sounded tired and embarrassed to talk about it. When Danny Rose doesn't want to talk about something, you know there's something wrong. Like, and we need his honesty. We need his voice. But he was just sounded resigned. He sounded just the words were just depressing to read. I mean, he doesn't think that Black Lives Matter will have a lasting impact. Troy, are you more optimistic than that? Are you optimistic for the future? We have an international following at the Cheese Room, but our listenership is predominantly white, middle-aged men. What can we do to be part of the solution?
Become allies, learn more, read more, understand more, take yourself into an uncomfortable zone about learning, go on a journey. I always talk to people and say, you wouldn't want to walk in my shoes, you know, and people are like, what do you mean, Troy? Well, come and spend a day with me. My own boss, who's white Irish, said to me, not that I was making it up, but couldn't really appreciate some of the stuff that I was presenting back to her. So that what Danny said, Danny Rose, about, you know, going on a train and you know, going into first class and being questioned while two, you know, older white people walked straight past him and there was no questions being asked. For my job, I travel up and down the country. So I travel to football clubs in all the furthest regions to the nearest regions. I spend a lot of my time on trains. I've had people, you know, 6 a.m. in the morning, you know, I get a booked train, you know, the organization allows me to book a train and get my seat. I say allows me, that's what we do. But, you know, and have so that, you know, I can just sit down in my seat and either work away or just relax until an appropriate time. You know, 6:30 in the morning, this guy's sitting in my seat and it's too early in the morning for me. So I said, oh, that's my seat. There's my ticket. And he said, no, sorry. I said, that's my seat. He went, prove it. So I went, well, there's my ticket. There's the seat reservation. He went, well, you ain't got both of them, have you? And I went, well, no, I just want my seat. You know, 6:30 in the morning, I'm in a suit, I'm in a shirt, the same way he was. And he went, well, if you're going to make an issue of it, mate. And I said, mate, seriously, it's too early in the morning. I'm not making an issue. I just want my seat, like that one there. And he got up and left, right? And I just thought, like, why do you need to do that? But what I'm saying is, this is not uncommon for us. So when people could say, oh, that's happened to me before, but this is not uncommon for us. You know, on the odd occasion that I do get a first class seat, I absolutely am aware that I'm sitting in first class, by the way, because people make me aware that I'm sitting in first class, almost as if your type shouldn't be here. So I would say to anybody, like you said, Brendan, is you know, open up and learn about the experience. And it's difficult to learn, but to read more, to understand more. Don't just criticize. So there'll be people that are now criticizing Danny Rose for coming out and talking again because they just want a shot of him. So not appreciating his experience, but just we don't want Danny Rose anyway. Get rid of him. We're fed up of listening to him talk anyway. By the way, Danny Rose is one of the most powerfulest talkers on race that there is, because he's very raw and he's very open. And certain people don't like it for some reason. Some of the media don't like it. One minute they like it because it gives them great content for their back pages. The next minute they're fed up with it. So again, that being an ally is an unbelievable, powerful thing. You know, it's just learning and understanding and wanting to appreciate a little bit more the status of a human being who has lived an experience and lived a life that is absolutely different to yours, and wanting to appreciate why their life can be deemed very difficult at times just because the color of their skin or they're deemed different. And I've begged anyone to try and do that if possible.
I had an experience a few years ago now when I was in Peru. Now I'm white, 5'10", 5'11", something like that. I tan very easy. I'm fair hair, but quite fair hair, but I tan very easy. So in Brazil, I can just blend in. And probably would be seen by most in Rio as a rich Brazilian because of my skin tone, but I can blend in. But one place that I couldn't blend in was Peru. Yeah, that's the way it works. One place that I couldn't blend in was Peru, or outside the stadium of Alianza Lima, one of the big clubs there. It's a club, very strong working class following. And I was outside the ground trying to look for the press entrance. And the Peruvian working class, most of them are descendant from indigenous people. They're much smaller than I am. So even though I'm like 5'10", 5'11", I felt like a giant. And I felt so conspicuous, really conspicuous. And it was a derby day, so there was tension in the air. And I'm just I stuck out so much. And as I made me way around the ground, desperate to try and find this entrance, there's people trying to trip me up and trying to get me into fights and so on, you know, because they're seeing me as something different and with a negative connotation. And it was at that point, because you can know on a theoretical level as much as you like, but it's different when you know something on in a really internal level. And that was the moment when the penny really dropped for me. That's what it's like being a visible minority with a negative connotation. I lived that experience for 20 minutes. You know, to live that experience all your life, God, that has to have a real effect. And so that's that. You know, you were saying there, Troy, getting out of your comfort zone. That experience really took me out of my comfort zone, and I won't forget it.
If you don't mind, Tim, how did it make you? Was that 20 minutes? How did it make you feel internally?
Worried, paranoid, uneasy.
Right. So all those, do you know what I mean? I mean, all those. So
defensive.
That's 20 minutes where you know, And I wouldn't want it to happen to anyone, by the way. But imagine living that experience on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly.
And that's why I say about that comfort zone and that understanding and that appreciation, just for a moment, to then, you know, form an allegiance with someone like me. I'm not saying it has to be me, to then understand and appreciate. So hopefully we can all learn together. And listen, we're calling out here to the wild, really. I don't know who the listeners are going to be. There'll be someone here that will say, I really understand Troy. And there'll be someone here that will say, I've heard him before. All he ever does is talk about racism. And I have to appreciate and understand that. But ultimately, all I'm doing is talking about the experience of, you know, and like I said, I've used color and I've used difference. And, you know, difference is it's a hard thing to kind of articulate and comprehend sometimes. And until you feel it, like how Tim has done, and then use the words that he used to describe that inner feeling, is then how you may just appreciate it just slightly, a little bit more.
I was thinking of experience that I had recently as well in Panama City. So, and this, I'm sure this isn't exclusive to Panama City either. I'm not a huge fan of the city, but I was checking into my hotel and I hadn't submitted my expense report. So I didn't have as much money as normal. So I'd prepaid for the hotel and was checking in. And, you know, sometimes with hotels, they'll ask you for a credit card for incidentals and they'll block off a bit of money on your card. And I was like, shit, if they do this, then it's Wendy's for dinner tonight and I've got to watch getting the Uber tomorrow. So I was in the queue and checking behind two black guys, American guys, and you can see where this is going. They were asked for their credit card for incidentals. And it was only because I was looking out for it that I noticed it. And then it comes to me and I'm like, they're going to ask. And I don't get asked for my credit cards. And they prepaid just like me. And I wasn't going to volunteer my credit card. I had no money, but I was like, that is white privilege. And it was only because I was looking out for it, because I had low funds. And were I not keeping an eye, I wouldn't have noticed it. And I'm sure that's a regular thing.
Yeah. Listen, being followed when you go into a supermarket, you know, getting a security guard look at you and not taking their eyes off you. Yeah. The security guard then pretends to be walking down the same aisle that you're walking down. You know, things like that, going into a restaurant and being questioned about why you're there. Or I'll tell you what, going to a football dinner. So a football dinner, you know, black suit, tie dinner, and being asked to hold someone's coat. You know, can you put that into the cloakroom? Or can I have the menu? I'm there to eat like everybody else.
Yeah.
But this thing around, you know, the black person and they're there to serve, not to eat, exists to this very day. And I'm in a football dinner when I'm being told, you know, it wasn't a menu. It was, when are we getting our starters? And it's only because I was coming back from the toilet, by the way. I was coming back from the toilet and I got stopped and said, when are we getting our starters?
Oh, God. Oh.
And I was like, well, how do I know? Do you know what I mean? But then I realized that what they were saying,
Yeah.
I absolutely realized what they were saying to me.
Yeah.
And until you experience things like that, you will never fully appreciate. I'm going over what I said before, but sometimes when I recall the situations, I then realize how much I have to fight just to exist, you know, in my football space.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an incredible conversation. So thank you so much, Troy. Thank you for joining.
No, absolute pleasure, Brendan.
We'd love to have you back, Troy. Would you come back and join us?
Yeah, if we can talk football, more football, that would be great. But yeah, I mean, that's who I am. That's my experiences, and I appreciate why you wanted me on to discuss those as well. So more than happy to come on at another stage.
Yeah, next time it'll be all football. Tim, thank you again. I promise I won't bother you again, like at least for another few more months till you come back.
No worries, my pleasure. Learning experience.
So cheeseheads, do remember to like, subscribe, comment. Please share this pod, whichever platform that you received it from, be it our Facebook group, be it Twitter, Instagram. Do share it. If you've enjoyed this conversation, do share it. It's a conversation that we all need to have. I do hope that you've enjoyed it. Do listen out. We will have a season review pod coming out in the next few days. Thanks again. And as ever, come on, you Spurs.